Hi, Jared Dennis with episode 31 of Success Council. Today we are taking a look at how government makes a giant mess of regulating businesses and encouraging good corporate citizenship. Then we will look at how the free market is starting to provide a real solution. Over the next two episodes, we are going to take a look at a couple of case studies, one in the affirmative and one in the negative. In our last episode, you learned that all government action is violence. It only has one tool in the toolbox, so to say, and that is to point guns at people to force them to live or behave in a way that it thinks we should. Lobbying is merely the business of cashing in on this monopoly of violence by bribing politicians to point those guns at certain people to protect a monopoly or increase profits in some way. A great case study is in internet regulation. The movie and music industries have lobbied government to build a whole infrastructure at the taxpayer's expense to protect its profits from copyrighted material. In early 2012, the SOPA and PIPA legislation was introduced to the U.S. Congress in an attempt to limit internet freedoms. The result was a massive and unprecedented coordinated protest that eventually saw the legislation voted down. Immediately following that defeat, ACTA was discovered and brought to light. ACTA is an international treaty amounting to the same thing as SOPA and PIPA that was about to be ratified by the U.S. government. Millions of man-hours were once again mobilized to thwart that treaty as well. By mid-2012, more freedom-destroying legislation was introduced, this time with the acronym of CISPA. And CISPA went to Congress. Again, millions of activists' man-hours were spent, and once again they thwarted the government's attempt to do what the public clearly did not want. Eventually, the entertainment industry did have a small victory when they convinced Obama to sign an executive order without discussion or public scrutiny to limit internet freedoms in the name of cybersecurity. This executive order was not as offensive as SOPA, PIPA, ACTA, or CISPA, but it was a step in the wrong direction. The fact of the matter is that the return on investment for lobbying government is simply too high. Spending tens of millions of dollars bribing politicians is a great investment if the reward is billions of dollars of hardware, infrastructure, and future damages paid for by the taxpayer. Even worse, once the infrastructure and bureaucracy is built to limit internet freedom, the power that it places in the hands of a government is incredible. As you may recall, the Arab Spring, a revolutionary wave of protest and demonstrations that rocked the Arab world, was organized and coordinated by efforts on the internet. Ever since, repressive regimes have tried to limit the internet and indeed have an internet kill switch. On May 7, 2013, Syria did just that. The whole country was cut off from the internet, courtesy of the government. Can you imagine if the internet died for your whole country? Unfortunately, the lobbyists will win this war of attrition and eventually will get their laws passed. While I certainly have no moral issue with the successful campaign stopping bad legislation, I wonder if it was the best use of resources for the activists. It is not fair or just that people steal, but we all acknowledge that some people do, and the responsibility to buy a lock for our front door is ours. Likewise, it's not fair or just that we have to defend our internet freedoms, but the fact is we must. And it is up to us to invent the locks that make limiting internet freedoms impossible. So what locks are the free market building in the internet freedom space? Just like BitTorrent and Bitcoin, which we spoke about in episode 25, the key to a secure network is in its decentralization. Napster was easily shut down because their servers were all in one room. It was centralized. BitTorrent is resistant to violence and men with guns because millions of computers each contribute a little bit of processing power, and there's no one point of weakness. It is decentralized. Well, let me introduce mesh networks. This is something the military has used for decades. When troops are deployed in foreign lands and there is no reliable infrastructure, audio and video from the front line can be relayed back to command by hopping from one radio unit to another. As long as there is at least one unit in range of the next, the message propagates. In fact, the so-called smart meters being installed in people's homes all across America use this very technology. The smart meter records your power consumption and passes it to the next house, and that one passes it to the next house, and so on until the data is passed all the way back to the power company, all done wirelessly. Well, some entrepreneurs are using the same concept to hopefully decentralize the internet once and for all. This would make the network totally resistant to Syria, U.S., or any other government trying to restrict its people's internet freedoms.
What's been limiting it so far is that these technologies that the military uses have been very expensive. They've been, maybe perhaps several $1,000s per unit. And now, with the smartphone in our hand, we have so much processing power in these devices compared to 10 years ago that we can actually build very powerful mesh networks from a processing standpoint. And you combine that with the Wi-Fi radio concept is actually 20 years old. The basic standard is 20 years old. There are much better with the new processing capabilities and with the new cost of RF chips coming down so much for the cost of for tens of dollars, you can actually build a much more powerful radio that sits, just like this battery pack here. You connect it to your smartphone, and you have this very powerful radio that can connect just like the military radios.
Pointing to such groups as Project Byzantium, which is already starting to create wireless mesh networks and protocols for running services like a Twitter or a Facebook or a Blogger or a Gmail through this wireless mesh network that has nothing to do with the internet backbone, and thus nothing to do with the systems of control associated with that backbone. That's right. With the advent of wireless mesh networks, we really do have within our grasp, quite literally, the technology that is needed to create an alternative infrastructure to the internet that will enable connectivity in a way that cannot be censored or otherwise dictated by the centralized authorities. We have, in effect, in our grasp, the idea of decentralizing telecom.
The interesting part is just how little man-hours are being dedicated to this project. It makes me wonder, had the millions of man-hours that went into defeating all those pieces of legislation been dedicated to promoting a decentralized internet, how far along this solution would be. I see this problem often. The problem, praying to the wrong God. Someone raised and living as a devout Christian will most likely pray to God to solve his or her problems. Someone raised and living as a devout Muslim will likely pray to Allah to solve his or her problems. However, in a world where we're all sent to government schools for your formative years, we learn to ask government for the solution to our problems. That becomes our habit. The problem is that the responsibility and the ability to solve the problem lie with us. The best way to solve the problem is to design the lock and implement the lock that secures our internet freedom. While I'm very grateful to the many who helped defeat SOPA, PIPA, and all the rest, I would love to see them dedicate some time to promote awareness of the mesh networks and why they are important. This free market solution is certainly in its infancy and needs some human energy behind it. Next week, we'll take a look on how the idea of praying to the God of government can turn good people into bad, also the moral free market solution that's taking the internet by storm. See you then.